Welcome everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Last session of Stir Trek, and you guys picked one that has metrics in it. I think we're all glutton for punishment here, right? They did ask me to announce that all the movies will be theaters 1 through 13, and then they all have the signs outside of it. So after, if you're staying for the movies, that's where they'll all be. So I'm Eric Martin. I'm Director of Engineering at Code Health, and today I'm just going to share how I've applied metrics and using AI to really help coach our engineering teams to be stronger and high-performing engineering teams. If you get nothing out of this talk, please remember this, that metrics should drive conversations. They should start conversations. They should never be career enders. You should gain the context, ask questions, and drive those conversations. Has anybody been part of it? Just curious, have anybody been part of a meeting where they've had a leader that's pulled up metrics or a dashboard and you immediately cringe because you know that they're not using it in context and it's going to cause you more work and you're really not solving the problem? Anybody experience that?
Right here.
Oh, we got someone pointing. Let's. I assume that's your manager.
Yep.
That's funny. I think maybe next year we should do like a Springer style. We'll have the manager backstage in a quiet room and we have the team up here and we talk about it. No, but I found using AI has really helped pull information forward to me so that I can see if there are trends or issues that I need to address before they become an issue. So I'm assuming everybody's here because you've experienced what we just talked about, problems with metrics or just misuse of metrics. Oftentimes, metrics are ignored. We put all this time and energy to gather the data and information, and then leaders still just use their experience, or they don't gather that data or context to really understand, and then it's not really helpful. Or you might have individual scoreboards where you're using some kind of ranking that ranks people that doesn't really give you a full context of how they really perform and add value to your organization. Or using metrics like velocity just simply out of context. There's a lot that goes into it that could affect velocity from a personal level or a team level. And then if you're honing in on one particular metric, oftentimes people will game that metric to make that look good, but again, not adding value to the business or solving the problem. If you've been in this space, you may have come across frameworks like Dora or Space, and there's a lot of aspects out of those frameworks that I like and I've used and pulled into some of our processes. But our process then really specializes in using that information to help coach those engineers. And so we look at basically 3 tiers. So outcomes are pretty obvious. That's kind of your rear view mirror where you're looking at the outcomes. Are you moving the needle for revenue? Are you delivering on time? And are your customers happy with it? Then the system signals, that's where you can look into like the trends. Are you seeing good velocity trends? Hours per point, if you're using points for estimations, that gets to be an interesting trend that you can look at and gives you some interesting context. Review rounds and PRs, et cetera. Again, you're looking for those trends. What are the trends you're seeing that you may need to focus on and help fix? And then the fun part for me as a leader, where I really enjoy coaching engineers and helping them grow. I'd much rather help engineers to grow to a level where perhaps that enables them to find a bigger and better opportunity that's not on my team. I'd rather see them succeed in that way than stay on the team and not grow. And those behaviors are really the engine light. You want to see that engine light before it affects outcomes in a negative way. The outcomes, oftentimes, if you're looking at rearview mirror, you have an issue, you do retro. Retros are great, but if you can pull that stuff forward and look at those engine lights before you have to do something like that, then you're even better. So what we built, we used Linear and GitHub as a couple of the main sources, and there's some others that we tie in. Using our own in-house database, I built an application that aggregates all of that information. And then from there, we use dashboards that you can see those velocity trends, quality trends are important. And then the favorite part that I enjoy is the coaching part. So there's nothing here that we've built that's necessarily proprietary or anything. All that data is still, they're still in their systems of record, and we're just aggregating it in a way that is meaningful for us, or we can use in a meaningful way. So digging into some of those trends that we use that will steer into that coaching part of it. Velocity trends, you've seen this, you can aggregate it, see it by team. This doesn't really tell you anything tremendous other than, you might see some trends you want to focus on, but it doesn't really tell you how many people are on the team that could affect it, or other factors. Maybe each team does estimations slightly different, so this doesn't really give you a good comparison. I like this one because this gives me, as a leader, we know that customers want to know how much is it going to cost them and how much time is it going to take. And so even if each team adapts a different way of estimating, you have this constant. You typically know that engineers are going to work on average 80 hours a week, just kidding, 40 hours a week. And from there, that kind of becomes your exchange rate, so to speak. So you can then calculate, if we're averaging 4 hours per point and I have a project that's 40 points, I can then quickly do that math and know, okay, in 2 sprints or 2 cycles, we can have that delivered, or if I can get more help on it, we can pull that in. And that tells me the cost and it tells me the time. And if I see any variation of trends over time with that, then that helps me dive in to ask questions. Why is this happening? And what the challenges are. Other problems with just velocity metrics is this gives me some data. This says, this person, their velocity is above average, and maybe that's great. Maybe this person has some quality challenges, so then there's more rework that isn't really tracked here. And so that could be that conversation. By having this multi-dimensional approach, I can dive in and coach this person to focus on, hey, I'm okay with your velocity being lower for a while. Let's work on the testing aspect and improving that capability. And then now over time, your velocity will improve, and overall, quality will improve as well. Looking at velocity alone, this person appears like maybe they're not performing as well. But when you dig in and get context, maybe they're pulled into other meetings really helping people or helping the business. Or maybe they're an engineer that likes to perfect their code, and you can work with them and coach them to where they're shipping what's good enough and not necessarily what's perfect. One other trend that I like looking at as a leader is we track capital expense of development versus direct expense. And so this again feeds in as a team. How are we doing? Are we focusing on things that are going to move the needle for the business? Or are we focusing on a lot of tech debt or a lot of issues? So again, I'm looking for trends. And you can, if you do this or when you do this in your company, you don't have to use capital. You can categorize your projects in different ways to make sure that you're focusing your team's projects on the projects that are going to move the right needle for the business. Diving into quality, we can look for trends, so I can see if there's quality issues that shoot up. I want to know what's going on there. Now we start getting to the fun part where I can now feed a lot of this information in through an AI analysis. And so it can give me some details, a quick summary, and then it shows me the bright spots. So I can see and have the conversation with the team in our meetings to say, hey, we've done really good improving this, because they want to know that they're making a difference. And then I can dive in to see, hey, there are some items here that we need to focus on and really improve this, and then start getting their buy-in on how do we improve these things? What's the root cause? What do we need to do to take the next steps to make these better? Now I dive into some of the PR metrics that you can pull out. Without AI, you can quickly see some trends here where you can see average rounds per PR. This I like following because I want to make sure that, as you all know, the further down the pipeline or the further down the life cycle, when you have to make changes, the more costly it is. So even at the PR level, if I see that there's multiple rounds of PRs, I want to know that so I can pull that forward. Maybe we need to have more time spent on analysis and design up front, or a particular area that we just need to focus on. Time to merge, that could tell me that we're either overloaded or takes too much time for us to get code out into production. Number of or percentage of rate changes. So this is feeding in from part of the AI analysis that I'll get into in a minute, where we classify the PRs. And I want to know are there changes that are being required in the PR process? And again, if there's a pattern pulling up or going high or trending high here, I want to know that and alleviate that further upstream. And first time to review, out of context, this really doesn't mean anything. But if I see a trend up, I want to know that if it's taking longer to get PRs reviewed, that's a concern because now you're changing context or you're losing context over time. And so I want to look at that and figure out what that problem is. And part of the AI analysis that I use with the PRs in general is we categorize things in these 4 categories. So I'm going to look for these trends over time. Are we trending in the wrong direction on any of these? And hopefully when I start seeing that trend, we start having that conversation sooner. Now we get into how we do some of the AI-assisted analysis. So every PR, every commit, every comment on the PRs, we store it in the database and we run it through a classification process. So I think we have about a dozen classifications now that we use. So are they bugs? Are they missing tests? Is there a design issue? And the fun part is pulling out, is someone giving praise to somebody else? Because I want to know that too. If someone's doing well, I want to be able to tell them that they're doing well, and I want to know that as a leader. As you know, as a leader, you can't be involved in every code change, every PR, or every feature that's built. You can have one-on-ones, you have team meetings, and you don't want to micromanage, but you also want to have that relationship with them. And this way, it gives you more visibility that you would probably not normally have. But every comment is classified, and then we group it into 4 dimensions. When you build this yourself or use another system, these dimensions could be different for you. The ones that are important to me are testing, code quality, collaboration, and coding standards. And then from there, we can weigh those priorities, and that gives us a score at a team level and then a score at an individual level, so that helps me start diving into where I see these issues. And from there, that's my favorite part, is where it generates the coaching summaries, which we'll show some examples here in a minute. And these coaching summaries are really designed for your conversations and your one-on-ones. And if you have technical leaders on your teams that are mentoring and managing others, this gives them the ability that they can see some of this information that they may not normally see either. And the key part here is always communicating with your team that you're using this to coach them and you are in their corner. You're there to help, and you're never there to criticize. You always want to ask them questions and help them engage in part of this as well. And as I mentioned, we flag uncertainty. So every comment gets a score, and we throw out low confidence ones, and then we can review those low scores too to make sure over time we're adjusting our process to make sure we're classifying things accordingly or in a meaningful way. So this is a really brief summary of an example of how we prompt this for the classification process. So it's a code review analyst specializing in PR comment classification. And then there's some of the categories. Like I said, we have about a dozen or so categories. And from there, it returns a JSON string that we store the category and the confidence as a percentage, and then the reason for it. So for anything that's scored as a low confidence level, we can go back in and review that and figure out if that category is just too difficult to really score long term, or make the adjustments to make that score high and actually be useful. And then those 4 dimensions I mentioned, they're all pretty important to us. Testing for me is the highest importance, so I give that a little extra weight. So when we do the scoring, testing is the one that I want to focus on the most. So it's really about the testing habits. Are they covering their tests appropriately? Are they executing their tests? Just because, especially with AI, I've seen sometimes people get in a habit of assuming that the AI wrote tests appropriately for them and covered things accordingly, and then they don't either execute the test themselves and wait till maybe the pipeline catches it, or it just didn't cover something that should have been caught. And then of course code quality. So this really gets into things that are important to me and my team. Are they designing things well? Are they following good practices from good design patterns, making things readable? And then collaboration is huge in our teams. We're a highly collaborative team. So I also pull up information here to be able to see, to gain visibility in if someone's giving praise, like I mentioned, if they're very positive in their communication style, or if they have a tone that can sometimes create some friction between engineers. So this is a great way to draw that up, whereas a leader, you may not always see that, and so you're basically trying to prevent potential friction between engineers that you don't want it to get too far down the road, and this helps bring that visibility sooner. And of course, standards. So we have, our own internal coding standards and requirements that we follow. So those are important to me, but over time, not quite as much as I want to make sure that testing is number one, and we have high quality going out the door to our customers. So at a team level, this gives me visibility pretty quickly into those 4 categories that I can see as a team. And as we were building this, I was trying to figure out where that threshold was to know what's really good and the things that I need to really focus on as problems. And basically found that 4, so we do a scale of 1 to 5, and that 4, right at that 4.0 is kind of that mark. So anything below a 4, that's where I wanted to start showing a warning color to grab my attention, that I need to spend some time in this. And so in this case, I real world example, dug into this and knew that a lot of our UX design patterns were not being followed. And so we could dive into that, and we've gradually been improving that over time, and that score has been coming up. So this really helps you know as a team, what do we need to focus on? And then I can see patterns for, who are the ones that are scoring the highest in these categories, and potentially anyone that's falling below that 4.0 average. And so now I can drill down each one of these, each person, I can drill down into their own coaching profile, and it gives me a lot of data around this person, so I can start figuring out what are the categories that they're struggling in, so I can help them. So at a glance, one engineer, the trend is really important so I can track over time. So if you have an engineer that you're working on coaching and elevating their abilities, I can see if that's improving over time or not by looking at their individual trend. In this case, this person started out as a 5.0. They're down to a 4.7, so I'm going to have a talk with them to get that up there, but no, I think this person's pretty good. And I can then see, in particular, this person does well in these categories. If any one of these are down, then I'm going to focus on that. And then the fun part. So this is part of the AI analysis that I use. So I can look at the quick summary at a glance to see a general gist of what this person does well. But in particular, this is the part that I like too. So it really categorizes the trends and the patterns that it's picked up that I may not always notice. In particular, the last one there where it says peer impact and learning culture. So it starts to give me this example around the things that it's picked up that this person does well when he's communicating to other engineers and he's building a culture of learning on the team. And so if I have someone that's struggling or someone new to the team, this is probably one person that I want to pull in and help train that person or ramp that person up, because this person's really good at communicating in that manner. This might be an example of someone that's fallen below a little bit of that score, as I mentioned earlier. So I can look at things like testing, since that's pretty high on our list, or code quality, and try to dig in more data to see what I need to do there. And this has already provided a lot of that for me. So when I look at this person, the growth areas have already been identified. And so this one's interesting to me because I can look at the design decisions. So as I dug into this person has challenges with, in PRs, are getting more comments to make changes in their design to make their code better. And so now this tells me I can pair this person up, and it actually says here a suggestion is considering some time up front that they're pairing up with somebody to review their design. Maybe this person documents it first and then has someone review it asynchronously, or it could be a call. That's the call that we can do as a team, and that flexibility. And then it also gives a little nudge here of how you might communicate that to them. So you can say your code quality is really high, but noticed, that some design-related comments. Now, obviously, I'd never encourage anybody to just go into a one-on-one and read something like that word for word, but it gives you a little gist of how you can communicate that in a way that's positive to them, and it'll be much easier to receive. And then it goes into some additional recommendations. So beyond just those details, you can review the bulleted list of some recommendations it has. And then we put this in here, especially as we grow in our teams and we have other leaders growing into positions where they may not have as much experience leading others and being able to communicate in a way that's receptive. This gives you some kind of guidelines on how you might approach opening the conversation with an engineer in their one-on-ones so that they can communicate in an effective way. And then diving further, this pulls in those real examples of PRs in particular that show what some of those examples might be that they need to work on. So I can quickly see the summary of the PR, and then I can click right in here and pull up the details. So it gives me even a little bit more than what we've aggregated into the database. I can look directly at the raw data at the communications there. I can look at the commits and the code changes and diffs and get a little bit better idea. Or if I'm using this to figure out how to find the right person to coach them, I can aggregate this data in a way so that person sees some of the examples and can then also coach that person. So here's just a little summary of kind of what our prompt looks like in this case. It goes a lot deeper than this, but the gist is that we're telling the AI that it's an engineering leadership coach, and we want to analyze the engineer's metrics to generate a coaching summary for their managers' one-on-ones. And so we want to input the scores, the history, all of the information we've already talked about gathering, and then we want to return what I just showed you, the overall estimate. This is key, the strengths with evidence. You want to be able to provide that evidence and be able to tell them what they're doing well. And then growth areas with the talking points. So this really helps you get a better understanding of how to communicate with them on those growth areas. Then we have, of course, velocity, and then those recommended actions and the conversation opener. The critical part in this, too, is making sure you include guidelines like this. So we always want to frame those growth areas as opportunities, not criticisms. You want the tone to be positive. Referencing the actual data, that's important. So you have the context, and then you can help them have that context. Otherwise, it's just telling them they're not good in this area doesn't really mean anything to them either. And then if you see the scores improving, acknowledge that. And it's your job to also monitor that. Is it improving? If you're having someone else help coach and mentor them, is that helping them grow? Are you seeing those trends go? So overall, to summarize this process, making sure that you first notice the patterns. Observe the data, notice the patterns. Do you see things trending upwards? Are they declining? And then contextualize it. Just don't look at the data, don't look at the numbers, and then just assume you know. Contextualize it, ask questions, and then have that discussion. They may have some other insights that this may not bring out. And then that also helps make them feel like they're owning part of that. So if they have an area that they can grow in, you want to have that conversation so that you can draw that out. And if they have some ideas that might help them, then they also take more ownership of it than just you doing that. So working together with your engineer, create a support plan. It could be pair programming, could be perhaps they're struggling in an area because they feel like their workload's too high. It could be a number of different reasons. But if you don't have that conversation with them, even with the AI analysis, it may not really give you what you need to know. And then finally, as I mentioned, you track it. So we have the trends, we have the scores, you can then track their progress over time and still always have that conversation. Ask them, do they feel like it's getting better? So Guardrails as part of this is very critical. It's really part of the feature to make this work. So on occasion, when we meet as a team, we may go over some of those team metrics that we need to grow and improve on. And so I do have presentation mode built in there, so I make sure like when you see that ranking card where engineers are ranked in the scores, I want to make sure people don't get hung up on that. Even though everybody has access to all the GitHub data and all the linear data, I want to make sure they don't get hung up that they may be ranked lower than somebody else and cause problems. So I want to make sure they don't get stuck on something like that. All the engineers can see that the coaching page, the coaching profile that I showed you, or showed you parts of it. So this helps them go in and see a little bit more. If they forget, they can go in and see the information there that we talked about, and it helps build trust so that they have visibility into it, and they just don't feel like, you know, you as a leader are making things up. They can see the data as well and potentially give you feedback. Maybe it's not quite what it should be, and so they can give you that feedback as well. The critical part of this is the human relationship. As I mentioned, you're talking to your engineers. You want to make sure you have that relationship. But what I love about this is, you know, you have your velocity data, you have your project data, but you're including the real human relationship communications between the PR reviews and the comments, and you can pull Slack in and all of that. And so that helps you really see how people are interacting with each other. And AI is amazing at being able to take that information and classify it and show you those trends that you may not normally be able to see on a day-to-day basis. You know, if you're as you keep moving up in a leadership position, you want to be more strategic. You don't want to be down into the weeds and the code with a team, but you do need to know, how's the team performing? How are they interacting with each other? What's working and what's not? And as I mentioned, confidence on everything. So you track the confidence, that way you can make the adjustments as you keep going. And then that multi-dimensional approach of scoring and trending. So you don't look at just a single metric. You're not pulling anything out of context. You're looking at the trends, and you're comparing all of the dimensions that you've built in there to paint the story so you understand it. So there are other tools out there. I like getdx.com if you're familiar with them, workweave.dev. I decided to build this myself for our teams. I have more control over it. One of those applications are very expensive, so this gives me a lot more control over how to pull up the information that I want to see for my team. But what I'd recommend the approach if you wanted to build something like this, if you don't have it already, phase one, connect your data. With AI, obviously it's super easy. You can connect data from APIs of any one of these systems and build the database very quickly. Two, you can do, if you're going to do the velocity trends and hours per point or different metrics like that, you can easily do that again with AI. You can build charts very quickly so you can start drilling down into those. And then start pulling in the PR analysis and other communications, anything from Slack or things like that. Pull in so you can see those rework patterns, the review cycles, things like that. And then the fun part, you get into the AI classification. So you can start to group that information, and then finally build the scoring and then the coaching summaries for your teams. And then you just keep iterating, calibrate it. It's not a one and done. Keep monitoring, making sure that things evolve, AI evolves, your team evolves. Keep reviewing and analyzing the classifications and the summaries and making sure it's still providing the value that you want. And really the hardest part out of all of this isn't the code. It's really that conversation with the team. I know when I was still an engineer and writing a lot of code and having leaders use metrics, I didn't like it at first, and over time really began to appreciate it. And so I've experienced that with engineers on my teams where they might be reluctant at first, but have that conversation with them and make sure that you're communicating that you're on their side and you just want to help them grow. And if you build that relationship, then it's not that difficult. It's been interesting, you know, going through this process and building. For example, one of the people on my team were reluctant with some of this at first, and then especially with the AI analysis, they were very excited with what they saw. They thought it was very useful, and when they saw their own information, it was very helpful for them, and they thought it was very valuable. And finally, if you forget all of the metrics and all that when you wake up tomorrow, things I hope you take away is that the guardrails are a feature. Build that in through the whole process. And then focus on those three tiers. You want that rear view mirror, and then you want the system trends, and then you want that engine light. You want to focus on those behaviors that pop up before any issues happen downstream. And finally, if you forget even those two, remember, metrics, all of this should start conversations, not end careers. And I'm getting you guys out early. It's the last session of the day. I'm here for questions. Anybody have questions? Yes?
Like some people use metrics over time to kind of obfuscate them.
Mm-hmm.
So if they notice that you're paying attention to velocity, they will reduce the scope of each card and increase the time on the card.
Yep.
So how do you prevent the behaviors that allow people to go under the radar when they should?
Great question. So the question was basically like focusing on like velocity, and maybe someone's trying to game it where they could maybe overestimate it or something so that the velocity looks good, but nothing else has really changed. So I think that goes back to the multi-dimensional trends that, so what the hours per point is a very good one there that that helps flush that out. So if you see a team or an individual person where the hours per point is going a lot higher, that's your first indication that they're probably overestimating and just trying to game the system. That's the way I've found useful as well. Does that help answer your question?
I have people that play the hours too.
Well, so the hours, in our case, I assume 40 hours a week. I don't get into time cards or like they're telling me they're working 60 hours one week. I just basically assume that on average we're working 40 hours a week, and so if they work X number of points and I see the hours per point going up to 8 versus 4, or the team's at 4 and they're at 8, then I'm going to start asking some questions like, why are your estimates so high?
What if it's a team decision to play the game together?
So a team decision, in the case of having multiple teams, and I might look at, okay, other teams are 4 hours per point, this team's at 8 hours per point, so I may ask some questions there. I'm not sure there. I think
I usually like move between teams when they're struggling to
Mm-hmm.
basically do an audit for the internal behavior of the teams. And I got to work with a team where the person's job is to change one verbiage
Mm-hmm.
on a screen, and that's all they had to do for 2 weeks. And so the cards were written in a way that really tiny amount of work, but because of the way how small the cards are, they're all dependent on each other to complete it. And that is the decision the tech lead did. And if you question it, you lose your job. So everybody's just watching the nonsense, right? And when I called it out, I was the one who got in trouble. But the idea is that they normalize that behavior, and they think this is normal. And I'm like, we're just having people sitting doing nothing, waiting for each other.
Yeah.
I had someone else who chooses to mark themselves as active all day. So their system says they're green. They look like they're working, but you can never find them whenever you reach out.
Yeah.
I have people that submit to GitHub their work, and it's nothing but empty lines and new spaces that they're filling up the whole thing with.
Yeah.
So you think they're submitting a lot of code changes, but there's really nothing being changed in the code.
Yeah, those are tough things. So if you can't hear some of the questions, just if I can summarize, basically just some of the teams she's involved in are trying to just kind of game the system, basically like they overestimate so it looks like their velocity's high. They may submit code changes that are meaningless just to get perhaps lines of code or number of commits. I actually had a slide in there one time, like I don't normally find number of commits being really useful. And so again, going back to like if you have multiple teams and one team in particular is gaming it and you see this trend going up, if they're all gaming it, that's where typically I feel like as a leader you could probably start sniffing that out, and then that's really more of a culture issue. So all of these, anything here, this is definitely not a foolproof system. It's mostly how do you find those signals to start honing in on those problems. And then that might be where, as a technical leader, I may have to dive in those code. If I see someone that's just submitting empty lines in a commit, that's going to be a conversation for sure. And so that's where the leadership has to, kind of step in there too. But any other questions? Yeah.
In terms of culture and impact to culture that this could have, did you introduce this sort of system in a relatively healthy already culture?
Yeah, I would say, where I'm at, we have really good culture, really good collaboration, really good team. So that certainly helps. There was some reluctance at first with a few people. So I think you're going to have that no matter what. So you do have to have a good culture, but if you're coming into a bad culture, I don't think it's going to hurt, because now you can start flushing out those things and you can't solve everything. So you customize what you think is useful the most and start focusing on that. What I found useful, if there's another point to get out of all of this, is that AI helps bring all of this forward. So I could have one-on-ones, I could have team meetings, and sometimes, so even one-on-ones, one of the things this helps solve is sometimes engineers don't want to share that they think someone else is struggling in a particular area. So this helps bring that out. So it kind of depends on the culture, but customize this to where you can find the problems that matter the most, and then focus on that.
Also from a technical, high level, but also technical point of view, in terms of the tool itself and how you've architected it and how it runs and what triggers it, is it in your build pipeline? Is it in your GitHub PR pipeline?
Okay, good question. So I'll talk a little bit about how I built this. So that's basically your question, right? Like how we approach this. Basically, the way I have this set up is it's aggregating the data on a schedule, like once an hour. So there's some other charts I didn't bother showing. I still like seeing some things, but a little more. I don't need it real time, so I don't have webhooks hooked into this, but I do per hour, I kind of pull in some statuses from Linear just so that through the day I'll kind of check on some things. But the AI process I run once a week, because the main thing is if you're helping coach engineers, they're not going to change behavior in a week typically, right? So you don't need that running very often. But the other metrics I do care about, so I'll run a little more frequently. But yeah, so I aggregate into a database and built the data model and customize it. I try to do it in an agnostic way, but that's how I approached it. Yes, up there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. When you were displaying some of your charts on your slides, I noticed a lot of your metrics were fairly smooth curves over time.
Mm-hmm.
Did that take a lot of calibration? Was it always that way? Or are there some things where it's much more jittery, and how do you handle that?
Well, one, I think the chart.js, the question was some of the charts appeared smooth, and if that was calibration over time, if I look at some of the PR related turns charts, they probably just appear more smooth just because of the chart tool. There wasn't a lot of fluctuation in that. I'm trying to think of anything. So he was kind of asking if there's something that was jittery, and then I had to basically tune anything to figure how make it more smooth. Nothing's coming to mind offhand. The main thing that I had to tune is early on the classification process was challenging. It was pulling in, so that, when you're a leader, there's some people you have a relationship with, and you've seen their code, you've seen their results, they're good. So I definitely, early on, I had a little bit of some tuning around some false positives, some things that were flagging as not good that were false. So that's where you have to spend some time to tune it a little bit and tailor it for your needs. And it was a personal learning for me too on some of this. So I think if I was doing this over again, I'd already have some of that learning baked into it. But other than that, I can't think of anything that I've had. That's been the main tuning, if that kind of helps answer your question, the adjustments that I've had to make to this.
You got some known good examples.
Yeah. Anybody else have questions? Let me check here real quick if the overflow rooms have any questions in case you guys are curious. Had a comment. Well, shoot, that was too late. Projector seems blurry, but that's all the questions I have. Any other comments, last comments or questions?
Can I ask one more?
Yeah, go ahead.
From a broader team standpoint, like every team might be different, but do you have on an individual team, do you have individual test engineers as a discipline or quality engineers? What role do they play? Are they generating code that's also being analyzed like this?
No, pretty much we're all full stack engineers.
Okay.
I did forget to mention one thing I did want to draw in here. Part of the PR analysis that we do have product managers and creative designers that also provide feedback on this. So it's not just engineer feedback, which is also important because you want to make sure the communication to product or other teams are good as well. But yeah, we don't have any QA on this in particular. And if you're going to scale this up to large organizations, there's clearly other things you might want to focus on. But this was my approach, and this works for us. It's a startup, and we're growing. So I had 3 engineers starting up, and we've had up to 13. And so we've kept growing. So there'll be things I'll keep adjusting as we keep growing. Okay. My LinkedIn is up there. Connect with me. I'd love to hear after, especially if you guys find this useful and apply it back, at your work and what works, what doesn't work. Definitely give me feedback. But thanks everybody for attending.